Hello and welcome to the show. Now, a little while ago, we did a run out of fuel race where we took a group of A-class cars to see which one could burn through its fuel tank the fastest. And I wanted to have another go with this challenge. It was really rather good fun, but this time out, we were going to go up to S-Class. Now, that meant we were going to have some monstrously powerful and incredibly fast cars. Let's not forget, the vehicle that I used in the A-Class one was this Dodge Charger. It had 800 horsepower, 800 torque. So up into S-Class, we were likely to see some, really rather powerful vehicles. And in theory, I was expecting to see them go through their fuel tank an awful lot quicker. For the race, we were going to go to the Daytona Short Circuit. A little bit of an awkward start, trying to get off the line here, especially with such high-powered vehicles. Yeah, it is a little bit of a bugger to get the cars going. Turn 1 is a little bit of a pain as well, but most of the vehicles made it through there cleanly. At the front, a Dodge Challenger was leading the way. Of course, track position wasn't important in this one in particular. It was all about trying to get through the fuel. However, a bunch of race cars on a race circuit, and, well, there was going to be some racing. The Viper had tremendous straight line speed, goes to the outside of the Lamborghini as they go too wide. This is about the narrowest part on the course with two incredibly wide vehicles, but they do make it through that section. The Countach is to the outside of the Viper as they head down towards the next corner. Lamborghini, though, is just a fraction too wide. It is very easy to do that at that particular corner. You just have the rear wheel on the grass. You can't get the car stopped. You will end up in the dirt. So the Lamborghini was dumped back through the field. I had gone for a little bit different a strategy to the one that I used last time. Last time I just built as much power as I could in A-Class. For this, I'd gone for the Hot Wheels Mustang, and while it did have over 900 horsepower and mid-800s torque, I'd gone for this car specifically because of the aero. There is huge amounts of downforce on the Hot Wheels Mustang. I maxed out the sliders naturally, my hope being that that would create plenty of drag, and drag is not good for fuel economy. It's good for downforce, certainly, and the Hot Wheels Mustang was actually rather nice through the corners, relatively easy car to drive fast. I was hoping that that would do the trick for burning of the fuel. It did mean my car was a little bit slow down the straights. I was getting pretty much destroyed by some of the incredibly powerful cars in this field, but that didn't matter because, well, the lap times were irrelevant here. It's all about who could get through the field. One of the vehicles that we were expecting to do relatively well, the Fast and Furious Raid Charger. This thing, incredible amounts of power can be got out of it. Quite a handful by the looks, though, going a bit sideways through the oval, very sideways through the oval section. Scares the crap out of an MR2 that has to take some avoiding action. Yeah, probably not the easiest of vehicles to drive. You would expect the Raid Charger to have a large fuel tank, but apparently not. We did have to ban the Bone Shaker as well, because that thing will get through its fuel ridiculously quickly, and everybody would turn up with the same car. Another vehicle that was one to watch, the Lamborghini Countach, did very, very well in the previous race, came second only behind the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. So up in S-Class, more power from this vehicle. Now you'd expect it to potentially be doing well again, burning through more of the fuel. The RX-7 behind was going around the outside of the GMC Cyclone. It was great to see such a large variety of vehicles in this race, all sorts of different strategies when it came to picking of the vehicles. At the front of the race, the Viper had been leading the way, but he was being caught by an Aston Martin Vanquish. The Vanquish, well, I know the Vanquish can get over 1,000 horsepower, the Viper can get over 1,000 horsepower, as can the Mercedes behind them. These cars, incredibly powerful vehicles, and they were very, very fast. Around this circuit, the Viper was trying to fend off the Aston Martin, but didn't really quite have an answer for the acceleration of the Aston. This race did get relatively spread out quite quickly. The Daytona probably didn't help with some of that because this is such a high-speed circuit. The cars like the Aston Martin and the Viper that had so much straight-line speed were significantly faster a lap than some of the other vehicles. Again, though, as I said, lap time slightly less relevant when it was all about burning through the fuel. I had a relatively lonely race, actually, for a lot of this. Behind me, there was an interesting little group going on, a touring car and a classic Formula 1 car. Interesting choices of vehicles, most definitely, and while my Mustang was merrily burning through its fuel, it is no match for the F1 car in terms of straight line speed. Comes flying past on the inside, although I think it got some twitch as it ends up bounding off towards the wall and coming back down again. The race car's interesting things to go for. We're probably not the most economical of cars, though we're likely to have relatively large fuel tanks. We were seeing some of the drifting tactics going on. Now, people tried this previously. Theoretically, you might be able to burn a little bit more fuel by doing this, the theory being that you can be on full power for longer through the corners, whereas if you're driving the corners normally, you might not quite be on full power at various points. And while that is a solid theory, I think you might end up losing what you gain there in other ways, especially if you're racing close and there are other vehicles around. You've got to be a little bit careful, or if you just make a little mistake, you make a little misjudgment, and that's a lot easier to do, when you're throwing the car about like this. Then you're going to end up having to be off-throttle in places where you perhaps wouldn't. You saw with the Challenger, as the Chevy came past, you'd have to be out of the throttle and, dealing with that car going past you. I don't think it actually makes a huge amount of difference overall. I think you're probably just as well off driving the car normally around the lap. As I said, the field was relatively spread out this time around. There wasn't quite as many on-track battles. This was a peculiar one between the Supra and the GMC Cyclone. The GMC gets a fantastic run out of the chicane, would get up alongside the Toyota, trying to go the long way around. The Supra just couldn't quite get his car stopped or turned in time and would end up on the grass. And that was something else that you had to worry about. These cars were predominantly built to have tremendous levels of power and so on, but the car still had to be drivable. If the car was too tough to drive, you would end up, making mistakes, end up on the grass, and then you're going to be losing time that you could be used for burning fuel, because you'd have to be on the brakes and slowing the car down. So, yeah, you couldn't afford to have a too difficult a car to drive. The first vehicle, though, to empty its tank was a little bit unsurprising. The Fast and Furious Raid Charger would run out of fuel around the 10-minute mark into the race. But interestingly, that wasn't much earlier than we had seen. I think it's about around the same time that we saw the Wagoneer run out of fuel in A-Class. And while the Charger would park up, the replay camera has absolutely no idea what to do with a car that's broken down. There were, again, a few more battles going on. As the kind of race progressed, more cars found each other. There was a lot of the early laps where there was not very much going on. But as the race did go on, there were a few vehicles racing one another. This Javelin was trying to have a look for a way past a 911 and just about got it alongside. Problem was, it was no match for the Porsche when it came to straight line speed, and the GT2 would retake the position. The Javelin was then being caught quite quickly by a Viper. Would have to worry about that one as they came into the banked circuit. But yeah, we weren't seeing huge swathes of cars dropping out particularly early in this one. It wasn't quite going as I had expected. The second car, though, to conk out would be the Viper, having run towards the front, never really fell that far behind the Vanquish, but yeah, about a minute later than the Charger, the Viper would end up conking out. A little bit of an awkward, and that was something that we did have to worry about, a little bit awkward in a few places trying to get the car out of the way of vehicles that were still racing, but the Viper did a good job. As I said, it did get a little bit crowded in a couple of places. The Supra was battling with the touring car, the Toyota far, far faster in a straight line, but the touring car much better through the corners. The touring car, I would think, probably the least powerful in this one. Most cars here will be putting out well over 700 horsepower. The touring car, I don't know how much power they get, but I suspect it's about 550, 600 possibly from the standard engines, and be the only front-wheel drive car going around here. Third place would go to the Countach. While the Viper had run out of fuel before him, the Lamborghini was again a solid choice in terms of burning through its relatively small fuel tank. Lamborghini pulling off to the side as they came towards, or sort of rejoining the oval. Fourth was a surprising result, the first surprising result of the lot, about 30 seconds later than the Countach on the run down towards the first corner. The Civic would give up. Wasn't necessarily expecting the Civic to quite to do so well as an RX-7. Can't get stopped in time for the first quarter. Yeah, the Honda burnt through its fuel tank really rather quickly. In fourth would be the Challenger, just seconds later than the Civic had conked out. The Challenger would give up the Ghost, actually a relatively similar point to the Raid Fast and Furious car. I mean, the drifting had, I guess, kind of worked. I think, you know, a classic muscle car was always likely to burn through a lot of fuel anyway. My Mustang would go next, coming through the slow chicanes. Yeah, slightly concerned. I wasn't quite going to... I had to kind of coast my way out of the chicane, so I didn't make a roadblock at a really bad point. I did, though, get the Mustang out of there, and we did get stopped about 13 minutes before my car ran out of fuel. The Supra would also catch an awkward moment to lose power and end up blocking the entire road, spun the car around to get it free. Not an ideal place, and that's what I say. It was a little dangerous with how narrow the circuit was. That, yeah, the Supra did just about get out of the way, though. Now, I had set the time for this race as 15 minutes. It was a couple of minutes less than we used last time. I was expecting these cars to burn through fuel much quicker, but the truth was they hadn't. The Mercedes out in front, very, very quick car, insanely fast in a straight line, over 1,000 horsepower. This one would get down. I think it got to pretty much 0% fuel just as it got to the 15-minute mark, but it was still running. Whereas a lot of cars have got, only 6 cars would run out of fuel. The RX-7 kept going, as did the McLaren F1. I think the McLaren had huge amounts of fuel left after this. The RX-7, you'd expect a rotary to be a really, really good choice with this. Racing swaps, not so much. You don't want to put the quad-rotor engine into a car. That comes with the large race fuel tank, as does the Ferrari V12 and so on. But, yeah, the RX-7... standard engine, you know, plenty of power in that rotary, was still going. The Toyota MR2, yeah, that was still working, as was the touring car. The touring cars were an interesting idea. I suspect they have just too larger of fuel tanks, really. They've got, again, racing fuel tanks, not so good for this this kind of challenge. It was keeping up pretty well with the MR2 through the corners, but would get mullered in a straight. The classic F1 car was also still going at the end of the race. Certainly not the most efficient vehicles, probably awful miles a gallon, but another car with a large racing fuel tank, which meant, and also, you know, it's a very, very light car as well, which is good for fuel economy. GMC Cyclone, I was expecting this one to fare better. After all, it is not the most aerodynamic of vehicles. People were starting to get perhaps a little desperate for burning fuel towards the end of the race, but the Cyclone was stubbornly holding on despite going incredibly sideways through some of those corners there. Yeah, I really thought the Cyclone was going to do better. Again, I suspect perhaps a very, very large fuel tank in the car. The 911s, there were 2 Porsches running in this race. 911 Turbo here, and that was trying similar tactics through the same corners to try and burn some fuel. It wasn't going to be enough. The Turbo would remain running throughout the race, as would the GT2 RS. That held on to its fuel. Cars just weren't burning through the fuel at the rate that I was expecting, and I wonder if there are perhaps a couple of reasons. There were a few more modern cars in this one. Perhaps better aerodynamics have led to the better fuel economy, and also some of them may well have had much larger fuel tanks. You know, the likes of the Lamborghini Countach are well known for having a tiny fuel tank, whereas perhaps the modern 911s and so on were a little bit better. The AMC Javelin was still going at the end of the time as well. Another car trying to burn some fuel by going sideways, as was the older Dodge Viper. Again, another vehicle, and we saw the SRT Viper conk out relatively early on. I thought this one might also go out, but that was not to be the case. So, some rather interesting results in this one. The Civic burning through the fuel so quickly, perhaps the biggest surprise of the lot. You know, the big muscle cars, the Countach going out, maybe not so. But, yeah, these S-Class cars, despite them, a lot of them being, you know, significantly more powerful, they just didn't get through their fuel tanks as quickly. I had I'd pondered about running the Formula Ford. Formula Ford has got a tidy fuel tank. We actually, in the versus community where we ran that, a few cars were getting quite low on fuel by the end of the race. I wondered about running that, and that probably would just about have run out of fuel in the 15 minutes at Daytona. But yeah, my Hot Wheels Mustang was a bit quicker, about 13-ish minutes, I think, before this conked out. I was really expecting these lots to burn through their fuel much, much quicker than they did. They simply didn't. There was next to no difference, really, between these and the A-Class ones. The A-Class Countach went out. It would be probably a minute later than the S-Class one, but it's still relatively close, and a lot of the other vehicles here, it didn't really seem to make a huge difference, having that much higher class. So, well, yeah, there was a slight disappointment. I was expecting to see cars conk out a lot sooner. It really wasn't the case. However, that is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.